Well, it is the top of the hour here, so we'll go ahead and get started. And like I said, welcome everyone to the second in our webinar series. This month, we are going to be talking about what it means to develop a safety-centered culture for your company. With me today, I have Jim Johanneman, one of our senior consultants here at Firestone Consulting Group. I am Matt Firestone, president of Firestone Consulting Group. Both Jim and I have years of experience in the electrical industry, but now have kind of switched gears from doing the day-to-day contracting to helping contractors grow and scale their business. Just a little bit about Firestone Consulting Group. We work with contractors of varying sizes around the country to help them align their teams, tune their processes, and ultimately increase their profits. We have some proven business methods that we use. All of it is driving to achieve success and deliver results through action and accountability. We would like to thank our webinar sponsor this month, Anchor Rock. Anchor Rock is a software or app that is built around safety and compliance. One thing that is unique about Anchor Rock is that it was designed with a field-first mentality. So they have a very robust app and then web interface for their program. So we would like to thank Taylor and Chris and the team at Anchor Rock for sponsoring our webinar today. You can see here on the slide how to get a hold of Chris. And one thing with Anchor Rock is they would do a great job giving you a demo of how their system works, but most importantly, they would like you to take their app for a spin and use their free pilot program. So with that, you can reach them at their website, anchorrock.com, or you can reach out directly to Chris at chris@anchorrock.com. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right into our webinar. Again, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us for this. Just real quickly, what we're going to talk about today is, what are the costs associated with providing a safe workplace? What is the return on investment for those costs? And how does this all come together to develop that safety-centered culture for your company? What we'd like to do is start off with a quick poll. For those of you that are logged in here, we would love for you to take a look at the poll questions we have here. But the first one that we have is, how is safety perceived in your company? And if you could real quickly, just on a scale of 1 to 5 there, vote for how safety is perceived in your company. And then there's a second one. Who manages the safety for your company? Is that a individual safety director? Do you have a safety team or committee? Or does everybody pull their weight in providing that safe working environment? We'll give everybody a couple more seconds here to respond. We have quite a few of you already, but a couple more seconds and we'll close that out. All right, so definitely looks like safety is something that is important to all the companies here. I'm glad we don't see any 1s or 2s on the rating there. Looks like it's a pretty wide range of who's in charge or manages the safety for your company. Some of you have some individual safety directors or coordinators or a safety team, and a few of you responded that it is everybody's job to do that. So we'll go ahead and dive right into the material. And Jim, I guess really when we're looking at safety from an individual's company standpoint, whose responsibility is it to provide that safe work environment?
Good morning. We'll just start off right, dig right in. The responsibility always falls on the employer. It's very encouraging to see that everyone in that poll answered 5, or 63% of you answered 5, that everybody's on board. But it's important to know how on board you really are. What we find in the industry somewhat is that the contractor and the responsible people at the top know what's going on, know what the requirements are. Drilling it down to the grassroots is the challenge overall, but the responsibility is always the employer's responsibility.
Jim, we know safety is ultimately the responsibility of the company or the employer, but are there individual rights that employees have when it comes to safety?
Sure, they do, and it's kind of a two-way street, and it gets very frustrating sometimes. The rights that the employee has on the job site is really pretty simple. He's entitled to a safe workplace and whatever it means to make the workplace safe, and to have all the PPE provided to him specific to the job. Of course, there's the basics always: the hard hats, glasses, gloves, etc. That's the basics. But when it comes to specialty things, retrieval systems for confined space, for example, becomes the responsibility of the employer, and he has to provide that safe workplace and the training that goes along with knowing how to work safe.
So we know that the contractor has this legal responsibility, but is that really the only reason why they should have safety as an important part of their company?
Of course not. Often, if we took another poll with a much larger sampling, you may find that safety is a pain in the neck for a lot of contractors, and they do the minimum. Safety is really part of the culture, needs to be part of the culture for the right reason. And the right reason is to make sure that every employee gets to go home in one piece every night.
So not only, making sure that they get home, but, like we used to say, is we really like to make sure that everybody made it back the next day too. So it's something that, definitely carries beyond just the job site, that we want people to feel that they're more than just a person there getting the work done for the contractor. Do you agree?
I do certainly agree. And in the follow-up courses that we have, we take a little deeper dive into the part about the guy getting back, or the worker getting back to safe the next day. We send him home safe tonight. We're going to know that he's coming back safe tomorrow, but what happens in between? That's something we'll dive deeper into.
Sure. So for contractors that, maybe don't have a safety director or safety department for their company, what are some of the places, or where could they find additional resources on some of the, specific requirements or what OSHA has outlined that they need to provide as a contractor?
Well, there's a multitude of places to go. You want to be sure to go to the credible sources. Of course, OSHA's website is easy to navigate, and you can really find all the rules there. However, the specific suppliers of safety equipment, etc., have their websites and their recommendations for how to use what safety equipment to use and how to use it and when it's required. Almost anybody that you rent tools from will provide the training for the tools that you're going to use, that an aerial lift, for instance, or a heavy demolition hammer. They'll provide that kind of training and certification that the workers have been trained. 3M and Graybar and all the big suppliers have safety departments that share a lot of information. Of course, NECA, the National Electrical Contractors Association, a very good organization to belong to, organized in terms of delivering really up to date, state-of-the-art information on safety. There's a lot of resources out there.
So it definitely sounds like even if you don't have the internal resources, there's plenty of places that you can go and find some of that information.
Yeah, our industry certainly enjoys that support across the board. Yep.
Well, great. I know that, with my experience with bidding jobs and, know that there is a cost to safety. What are some of the important things that we need to consider when we're looking at some of these safety resources? I know you mentioned PPE before, but what are some of the other things that we need to look at when we're looking at some of these costs that are associated with safety?
Well, there's certainly a number of hard costs that need to be included in an estimate so that you have it covered. It's part of your overhead and responsibility as an employer to provide that PPE, the hard hats, the glasses, everything you see pictured on that slide, and becomes a little bit more complicated today, even with the extraordinary amount of disposables that will be required re- to be responsive to the COVID epidemic. Of course, you need to, as the employer's responsibility to provide a safe workplace, it is also his responsibility to provide that PPE, which is relatively inexpensive in the terms of a big job, can be taken from job to job. But remember that the worker shouldn't be bringing their own hard hats to the job site. They should be company issued. That you have to be certain that they're rated for the properly rated for fire protection and shock protection, and your insurance company will want to know about that. And just to drop back again, your insurance company is another great resource for safety. They will go, you typically can get a representative from the insurance company to do job site walkthroughs for you. And that's helpful with your insurance premiums and using their tips without worrying about being incurring a violation. It would just be a tip.
So just kind of a follow-up question there with the PPE. When you were talking about making sure that the company provides the hard hat and the safety materials, what are some of the potential, maybe liabilities if the worker brings their own hard hat or maybe safety glasses and they don't meet the minimum requirements? If OSHA were to be on the job site and see these violations, who would be cited for that, the employee or the employer?
Another very frustrating thing, but we're in a social environment where an employer hardly ever wins a challenge in a compensation case, and that's a cost long term. You have to be sure that you are providing the proper approved safety equipment. Those wraparound glasses are important. Tinted sunglasses don't make it. Sneakers don't make it. We're not buying shoes, thank goodness. That's something that's exempt, but the shoes still have to be rated for the work, steel toes, etc. Hearing protection, earbuds don't make it. It has to be the rated ear plugs or headphone type ear protection. You can't just let a guy say he's got a hard baseball hat on or a hard straw cowboy hat on. It has to be the right thing.
Sure. One of the other things I see on the slide here is, in our conversation is having that dedicated safety person on the job site. What is, that cost of having that individual on a project?
Well, a site safety professional comes to you in a bunch of ways. We'll go again, deeper dive into that later as an obligation that you have to fulfill. It'll be in your specifications, whether or not you have to provide a dedicated site safety professional, or you'll share a site safety professional provided by the owner or by the general contractor. Typically, I've been seeing more and more these days that it's on a larger job that the site safety professional becomes the obligation of each trade. And that the cost is for a guy to do that every day is somewhere between $85,000 and $125,000 a year. So if you have to provide that person, and remember that he has to be on site that person has to be on site all of the time. So if he gets a day sick, you have to have a backup where you can't work. and that can be a big cost.
Sure.
Not
Sure.
working. Having a backup, maybe your company's big enough to have two, or if you're hiring that site safety professional from a company that provides that, and you give them a call quick enough, they can get somebody there to back you up for the day. But if you can't work, that becomes a really big cost.
So definitely something you don't want to leave out of your estimate if it's being required.
That's for sure. And again, for the right reason. They're your babysitter on the job and take good care of you.
So a lot of the costs that we talked about are, these hard costs, hard hats, earplugs, some of those, specific PPE requirements. But you also mentioned that, in the specifications, they might call out for like the site safety person. What are some of the other, maybe what I would describe as non-productive labor things that we need to make sure that we're accounting for in our estimate that pertain to safety?
Yeah, those are what I like to call the soft costs, but the real concern there, or the real item to pay attention to, is that they're repetitive. Those costs can't just be covered as a one-line item in your estimate. You may do that calculation and say that I have to stretch and flex every day for 15 minutes for 10 men for a year, and calculate that and put that in as a lost time item. But it certainly is a lost time, a non-productive hour. And the good thing is that if it's in the specifications, it's applicable to everybody that's bidding the job, and hopefully everyone would cover that kind of stuff for the right reason. And some of the other things that are listed there is the site-specific training. Just talked about that a little while ago, and being trained in the proper use of the tools. And I think one of the slides later on goes into why that training, and certainly Anchor addresses that in their safety application. The record keeping that goes along with that site-specific safety training, and your policies. Company orientation is probably once for each guy that you hire, and if it's, again, a long-term job, it depends on how many personnel you might go through, or how many of you are quote-unquote specialists in your company may come to work to do the fire alarm and then move to another job, and they have to be replaced. So you have more and more people than just the original 10 that you estimated that will need orientation. Drug testing is kind of the norm these days when the owner requires it, especially. You may have your own program, but the owner requires it. You have to count on being random tested, and that takes some more time.
So one thing I heard you say there, Jim, is, with this being called out in the specification, it definitely evens the playing field for everybody because they're all required to do it. But we still, as the contractor, need to make sure that we have those costs in our estimate.
Exactly. And one of the most important and time consuming, really, the others the first bunch of bullets, you can kind of estimate those numbers based on the manpower, et cetera. The job hazard analysis is probably one of the most important things that everyone will require, and it's probably the most effective way of preventing accidents. And again, we'll dive very deep into that in the next sessions.
Sure. So, we talked about some of these, specific training or certifications. And I know, we have kind of a long list, and you mentioned, maybe some of them are specific to tool manufacturers. But really, as we can see on the slide here, it's just making people aware of some of these, specific training and certifications. In your experience with things like the OSHA 10-hour or the OSHA 30-hour, who pays for the electrician to attend those courses?
Well, that could fall in a bunch of different ways. If you are a union contractor, an IBEW contractor, the 10 and the 30, the OSHA 10 and 30, and I'm going to look down this list pretty quick. Almost everything there can be provided by the apprenticeship training committee or the continuing education committee at no cost, or the cost that you pay in your union fees and your union dues, and typically are taken on off hours. And you don't have to pay for the labor. But if you are a contractor that has to do it yourself and you don't have that kind of resource, the courses have a fee. And of course, the OSHA 10 is 10 hours of labor that you're going to have to pay for unless you can hoodwink somebody into taking it on their own time. And it goes with all of the rest, the same thing. Fall protection is another course, and certainly you need to be certified. CPR, the same. First aid, NFPA 70E has come. The asbestos handling and silica. The ones moving down from scaffold and ladder and confined space is another certification. But the ones that involve equipment, the scaffold, the ladder, the bucket truck, and different kinds of tools can be provided pretty quickly by a vendor.
Sure. So definitely something we want to be aware of, but maybe of varying degrees depending on the contractor. With all these different certifications and trainings and looking at our workforce, maybe if we're a smaller company, it's pretty easy to manage some of these things. But as we grow and have more people that have to have these requirements, what are some of the ways that we could manage this certification and tracking, like we have here, who has what certification and, are there expiration dates for those? What is some of your experience with that, Jim?
Yep, if we just drop back and don't drop back, don't click back, but this is a segue from the previous slide, is that some of those costs, almost all of them, expire. So, if a guy has it from June to June and your job is running from January to December, and he was certified in one of these things last year, you're going to have to get him certified again this year. So there's refresher courses, and they do certainly expire.
Sure. So one of the things that I know is probably on a lot of people's mind and definitely something that's affected people around the country differently is this whole COVID-19 pandemic. And I know for some areas of the country, they really haven't seen any change in work. I've talked with some contractors that are in some of these heavily affected areas, and they've had as many as 90% of their workforce sitting at home because the projects have slowed down. I know with you being based just outside of Manhattan there, you've seen a lot of things firsthand in the news of how this is affecting contractors today. But I guess as we kind of dive into this whole COVID piece of it, I would like to launch another poll here and just kind of get some feedback from those of you that are participating in the webinar of, how is COVID-19 or the COVID-19 pandemic affecting you? And what are some of those things that you're doing to prepare for additional safety requirements of this pandemic? I'm starting to get some results there. So definitely people feel that they're fairly prepared for those. Looks like spreadsheets is the most popular response so far with how people are tracking employees and visitors to job sites. Definitely glad to see here, and I'll close the poll here in just a couple of seconds. And what we'll do here is I'll put those results up there, but we can definitely see that I would say more people than not are on the front edge of this here with being prepared for some of these additional requirements. Definitely glad to see that nobody selected one, that they don't have any plans or aren't prepared for the COVID response, but then also looking at some of the different ways people are tracking this. So it looks like spreadsheets popular, but then some of the safety apps that are out there as well. So as we dive into the the COVID piece of it here, some of the things, Jim, as you and I talked in preparation for this webinar, and you even mentioned it before, there's definitely some additional safety impacts that are around COVID. And like I said, with you being in, outside of Manhattan, you're seeing things probably a little bit more than some of us, like myself, located in the Midwest. But what are some of those additional safety impacts that you have seen recently, especially in the Manhattan area?
In the Manhattan area, they're still not even into what New York is calling phase one, who can go back to work, et cetera. They're still on the essential worker basis. And I'm sure that's the same with a lot of the other big cities for starts. That you must fill out an application to the city to be able to work as an essential worker. And it has to be done right. For instance, anecdotally, I just heard the last couple of days that if you're doing some air handler work and all of the feeders, et cetera, or the controls and disconnects are in the basement, and you file for that permit saying you're going to be working in the basement, but forget that you have to connect the air handling unit on the roof and didn't apply for the roof. An inspector comes by and they're pretty intense about it, the inspections. That's a $10,000 fine. So when we get to talking about costs a little bit, this is cost avoidance. And that comes into play an awful lot with OSHA. OSHA is just starting to develop their fine structure for COVID. Their fine structures are very, very heavy. And it's one of my pet peeves, or my most important tips, is to cost avoidance. Again, doing safety for the right reason, getting everyone home, but for the right reasons. Another right reason is to avoid, or a byproduct of doing that is avoidance of fines.
Sure. So it's definitely, something here. It sounds like there's a lot of things that are changing, or is, the term that a lot of people use in the news is it's kind of a fluid situation. So it sounds like, while there might be some guidelines, that some of these that we see today may not be the same guidelines that we have tomorrow or next week.
True. And everybody's heard on the news everywhere when to stay home. You certainly need to stay home if you're symptomatic. And keeping your job site safe, if you go to the 3M website, you go to that 3M safety/safety, they'll talk about how to handle the tools on the job. And even though the CDC has come out with some stuff about perhaps the virus is not transmitted by touch, I think that's still the common thought. Whereas you'll need to, according to 3M, have multiple. How do you hand off a tool to another person? Well, you can't without cleaning it. And how do you clean it? You have to use a soap solution and wipe it down and let it stand for 72 hours before somebody else can use it. The alternate to that is to mix 1/3 of a cup of bleach with a gallon of water and wipe the tool down, and you can hand it off to another person. But think about the cost of doing all of that every day and commingling the tools. And that needs to be part of how your protocol when you go back to work.
So definitely there are some added costs that COVID, has to the contractors. I heard you mention, even some of these, and I'm sure it's probably driven by the tool manufacturers. They'd love every contractor to go out there and buy multiple sets of tools for their people. But, if that isn't realistic, then things like the soap solution that you mentioned, or the diluted bleach. But again, it's additional steps that are going to be required on the project, that really maybe not lost time, but more non-productive time. And I see one of the statistics that you have here, that MEI has estimated this to be as much as a 40% reduction in productivity due to these precautions around COVID-19.
That's true. And, again, for the right reason, how much the tools cost, in terms of cost avoidance, going at the other end of the spectrum, where a COVID, a terrible outcome of a death on a job, or even sickness on a job, becomes a compensable claim. Your compensation will be charged, can be attached.
So even the few $100s for these additional sets of tools may in the long run be a far better investment than taking the chance of something happening on the site.
another one of those business decisions that we need to make. Yep.
Sure. So Jim, and we had a question come in from one of the attendees here that, with the whole COVID pandemic and some of these costs that are around that, in your opinion, do you think it's acceptable to ask for a change order for maybe a project that was already started, and now we have these additional requirements that weren't in our bid? Is that something that you think the contractor, it would be okay for them to ask for that change order on a project?
Well, you certainly will. I think it'd be a very difficult thing at this time to collect on or to execute, but it can't hurt to ask. If you properly craft your request, you are responsible for whatever PPE has to be provided. But the distancing and the time impact because of the distancing, perhaps it's a discussion about stacking trade, staggering trades, et cetera, in different workplaces so that you don't have to incur the separation and that kind of thing. But I think a change order, you should ask. I would ask, but it's going to be a very difficult thing. Who's going to pay for it? I mean, back to the owner for 40% of his contract in
Sure.
electrician's labor is a pretty tough pill to swallow for everybody.
So even though that you may not get paid for that, it'd probably be the best thing to at least make that request. That way it is documented, so that then that owner couldn't come back on you for delays, and especially on a project that had liquidated damages or something like that, that you would want to for sure get that change order submitted, so that there wasn't any recourse for that owner to come back on you.
Sure, and change orders are not necessarily always dollar deducts or ads. It could be a no-cost change order for an extension of the contract, kind of a thing.
Sure. So, and I know, the next slide here again is just some of these resources that are out there, and you touch a little bit on these, but I think one of the most important things to mention here is, there's some of these national resources with the CDC and OSHA, but it's also important for the contractor to really pay attention to some of their state and even local city government websites or some of the requirements that they may have, that as things open up in one part of the country, that may not be the case for their local area as well.
Yeah, the CDC, everyone on there, other than the state and city governments, is pretty standard fare, and you'll get good information. The state and city governments may impose different requirements. For instance, New York State any contractor in New York State has to provide their protocol to the state for approval. How are you going to keep your job site safe? And if you don't do that and you go to work, then you're going to incur a fine. So it's a cost avoidance again. So you should check with your locality to see what requirements, other than, it's what you don't know that'll hurt you.
Sure. So really, just to kind of summarize, this first part that we talked about, these costs, and, I guess I like to look at it maybe more as an investment in safety. I know there's, an outlay of money for that, but we talked about things like the PPE and some of those hard costs. And then, as you described, some of the maybe soft costs, the training, certifications, that safety person on the site. But really, the most important thing is we want to make sure that we are getting these, attributed to the individual projects that we are bidding. Some of the things may fall into overhead, but there is a cost and an expense associated with safety. But as we look at that, what are, really some of the, I guess what I would say, the upside of spending this money on safety or making this investment in safety? As a contractor, we're in business to make money. So what is that upside to spending this money on safety?
Listen, you need to take away any excuse for not going to work and causing the water cooler union meeting, or the water cooler job site meeting. Providing all of the stuff, or all of the safety equipment for the right reason, demonstrates that you care. And it will go back right to the title of this webinar, was creating a safety culture. Um, I'll tell you, a best practice tip is for you as the executive, the project manager, don't ever go on a job without setting the example. You do that in at least two different ways. uh, Always have your hard hat, your safety vest, your glasses, the proper shoes. Don't go out there in a pair of loafers on a job site. You carry your boots in the trunk of your car. Set the example all of the time. The second way is to never let a safety observation, an unsafe observation, go unaddressed. It could be as simple as a conduit nipple on the floor in a building. And if you go there and you see it and you pick it up and you put it in the corner or in the trash barrel, you're setting the example and setting the expectations. You go in on a job site and you see a guy on a third tier of an aluminum scaffold that you built up and he's got no rails on it. Man, I can remember a day where I almost embarrassed myself, but I certainly impressed the owners and the guys on the job with the language about getting off the top of that scaffold without the proper safety. Don't let it go without being addressed, and set the example all of the time.
So really what I heard you describe in there, are, it's things like it shows here on the slide. It's how are we, potentially eliminating those injuries, the individual not falling off of that scaffold or accidents there, or what OSHA violations those might be. Really this all comes around to keeping that EMR rate low and, keeping our insurance premiums low. But really, the thing you said at the beginning there is showing that you care. And, to me, that's something that really is going to drive that employee morale. As we look to, boost employee morale, what are some of the positives that come out of, how safety ties into that boost in employee morale?
Well, it resonates at home. People go home and talk about the pain in the ass contract I'm working for. I have to wear this hard hat even if it's 90 degrees out. And it gets back to the family, and it just sets that whole culture. Matt, will you drop back to one slide for a second, please?
Sure.
I don't know if we hit these violations and what the EMR is. I don't think we have a poll on if everyone knows what an EMR is. But these are, again, cost avoidance kinds of things. Of course, fewer accidents are the best thing for everybody. Fewer injuries and training with tools, don't get injured. But let's talk about OSHA violations for a second. In 2019, the top 10 OSHA violations were from falls or fall related. The highest one was in the area of about $2 million for a death from a fall. They ran down to about $250,000 for not having the proper training and certification for fall protection for the people on the job. You have to understand that all of the fines are the best interest rates you can get in the world. Let me tell you, if you have a panel that has no cover on it, that right now becomes a $13,494 fine. If it also has a knockout that's missing, that's a second violation on the same panel. That becomes another $13,000 fine. Not only do the fines go to you as the contractor, never to the man, they also go to the general contractor that you're working for. You want to talk about a change order and pissing somebody off? Get a 3-time violation, go up to a $39,000 worth of violation that he has to pay in addition to you. And you're really talking about some stuff.
Probably not going to do a whole lot more work with that general contractor.
No, but that goes back to drop back to the EMR, experience modification rating that your insurance company applies. And I'm sure most guys really know about it, but I'll brief it real quick. The experience modification is a calculation that's done based on how many hours you work and how many reportable claims you have and how much they cost to how much the insurance company is going to have to pay out on that claim. And that number needs to be at 1 or very close to 1, and lower than 1 is better when that calculation is done. If you get to a spot or a place where your EMR is greater than 1, you may be in jeopardy of bidding the next job. There are a lot of general contractors and public agencies that won't even let you bid the job if your EMR is greater than 1. So, and by keeping that EMR low, by avoiding accidents, it lowers your insurance premiums as well. Your insurance company becomes a good partner in this to walk your jobs and give you hints and that kind of stuff.
So definitely something from the kind of the top down with the organization is, safety is something that's going to, like you said, in some cases, make it to where we can't even bid these projects or do the work or cause our insurance to go up. So it's definitely something where safety is important. And that's why, just like we said in the title of this webinar, having that safety-centered culture really benefits everybody.
Yeah, and Anchor Block is one company that helps us, can help you an awful lot with the record keeping. The people that are visiting your sites, the near miss, the reports on near misses, and lessons learned are very important. And if you demonstrate all of that stuff and your accident investigations and your toolbox talks and all of that kind of stuff, and you demonstrate that you're keeping those kinds of records, it certainly helps with everybody that comes on the job.
Sure. And I think one of the biggest things here, like we've talked is, it sounds like it can be a scary thing with safety, and there's definitely a monetary cost associated with it. Not only if we don't provide the PPE and we have the accidents and we get the fines, but really if we start getting everybody involved in safety, we're going to boost the overall morale of our workforce. And like we can see here on the slide is, when that morale is increased, it also increases the productivity of the workforce. And from a contractor standpoint, increased productivity typically means higher profit margins on a project.
And incentive is, for a worker is not always, and we all know the old story, it's not always a raise or more money. It's showing your appreciation and care. And it might sound harsh, but that second offender, you tell him to put his hard hat on, and he doesn't, and you go back to the job site the next day, he doesn't have it on again. Some people need to be fired. And when other workers see that you're setting the example, they're setting your expectations, that's an incentive. They're doing the right thing and they're being appreciated for doing the right thing, and they're not just letting somebody else coast.
So that's a great segue kind of right into this, really what does it mean to have that safety-centered culture? And it's, really it's getting the company leaders, the office personnel, if you do have safety personnel, the field employees, but it's where everybody's kind of looking out for one another. And if we look at it just, for some people that maybe aren't familiar with what, culture is, we can easily define culture as, what are the attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, or customs of a group of people. So in this case, it would be shared by our company. But just like you said there, Jim, it's, having those people, the behaviors where they see the guy without a hard hat and they're going to call him out before the safety director comes and writes him up on the job site. So as, companies look to engage their employees and have a greater focus on safety, what are some of the key points in your mind that they need to remember as they're looking at bringing everybody to that same page?
Yeah, we often start, that'd be another great poll question. We also start job progress meetings with a safety moment. I mean, almost every job I've been running lately has come with a safety moment. Somebody talks about something that's going, I'm talking about the project manager for all the trades, the owner and that kind of thing, and not the people in the field. And the problem there is that we talked about it at that table and we understand it. We go into these kinds of webinars or seminars, and we don't get it drilled down to the grassroots. That's where it certainly becomes that setting the example and being out there and talking it up. Not just sometimes when you go to the job, every time. But that should be your. We should not make a business decision without considering safety first. And if
Sure.
you get out to the job site and that's what you're looking for first, for the right reason, and then get into your business, or you're looking at that as you're walking around, that's the way to get everybody on the same page.
So just like you said before, as the project manager, you don't show up and, like you said, your loafers. You have your boots in your vehicle, you put those on, you have your proper PPE on, that it isn't just the responsibility of the field to be safe, that, really to have this company culture, everybody's got to be bought into it. It's not just the boss saying, hey, you need to do this. The boss needs to be the one that's participating just as much as the apprentice on the job site.
That's right.
So just to, as we look at, what are some of the benefits around a safety centered culture, we've talked about a lot of the costs associated with it, and, even some of the potential fines or losses that we could have if we don't have strict safety policies and have those things in place. But, I really want to make sure that everybody understands that even though there's a cost, we outlay cash for that, that really, if you have it more of a mentality that that's an investment, then we can start looking at what is that return on investment. And as we can see here on the slide, here are some of those benefits of that safety centered culture that you might have from your company. Is, like you said, Jim, it's having that guy call his coworker out and preventing some of those accidents. Your example that you shared there with the general contractor, and how important it is to keep that EMR rating low. I think one of the most important ones, and maybe it's hard to put that monetary value on it, but what is your reputation, not only in the industry, but in your community? If you're known as the contractor where people get hurt on your jobs, you hate to be in the newspaper for those reasons.
Yeah, that also, turns to stay on the monetary note. We are talking about the cost of safety. They worry too about, the owners worry too about damage to their property. I mean, you're doing damage to yourself, and they don't need that on their insurance on their properties, but they also don't need damage to their sensitive equipment, depending on, a data center you work or whatever it is. But there's real cost to that. And you drop back to that last slide, and the last bullet on that was, how does everybody benefit? The way everybody benefits is by having the opportunity to bid the next job. And Matt was just saying, if you don't have a good safety record and reputation, you may not have the opportunity to bid the next job. And if you can get that message down to some of your workers that aren't complying or are balking, that's a good message. We want to get the next job. We can't do it if we're not working safe.
Sure.
And you won't be able to come to work without all your limbs.
So not only is it, may not even get that invitation, but it can help us win those next projects.
Yep.
So as we talk about, safety culture and those, I do have one last poll here that I want to put up for everybody. And it really just kind of brings this all together. And how strong do you feel that the safety culture is for your company? Again, 1 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. Give it just a couple more seconds here. If everybody's responded to this one a little bit quicker than the other ones. Definitely like where the numbers are coming in. A lot of 4s and 5s here. Give it about 2 more seconds here, and we'll go ahead and end that and put the results on the screen. But definitely, good to see with the group of people here that high percentage in that 4 and 5. I think with any of this, it's, making sure that we're aware that it isn't just, hey, we have the safety program, and since it's in place, we can forget about it. It is something that we do have to be able to adapt to new things. Like we mentioned, the whole COVID pandemic is something that I don't think any of us came into 2020 thinking, hey, we're going to have this huge pandemic that's going to shut job sites down and have added expenses. But definitely something that we need to look at. Just kind of some final thoughts here, and we'll open it up to questions. But those of you that maybe don't feel as strong in some areas of your safety program, or that overall culture, one thing you need to keep in mind is change doesn't happen overnight. We definitely need that buy-in from both the office and the field, and have that open communication to really develop this safety-centered culture for your company. Looking at what the next steps might be, it's, getting to where people have those behaviors, those attitudes, what become the customs for your company that, like Jim said, you get the guys in the field or gals in the field to call one another out when they see a safety violation, whether it's hard hat or safety glasses, or they don't have the railing on the scaffold. But these things aren't going to change quickly, and they aren't going to change by themselves. But what we need to make sure that we are doing is, take that first step and, set some goals of where we want to be with this, not only our safety program, but how much of our culture is made up of safety for our individual companies, and then come up with a game plan to work towards that goal. Jim, do you have any, parting thoughts or comments that you would like to make before we open it up to questions?
I do. Just to, we were talking about the OSHA fines, and the easiest money to make is the money that you don't have to spend after you've already got a hard price on a job, for sure. But the way, I just want to mention how scary it can get. The highest fine that OSHA ever has imposed, we should have another poll, was $87 million. And it was to the same company, that was in 2008, and it was to the same company who in 2005 got a fine for the same thing for $21 million. The $21 million was for hazard communication, it was chemical factory or whatever, and it was for not having a proper documentation policy on hazard communication. And the $87 million was for not doing anything about the fine in 2005. So if an OSHA inspector comes on your job and finds a violation and you suck it up for whatever, remediate it immediately, even while the guy is there. Get a guy to get somebody to put a cover on a panel if that's the violation. And maybe you get a non-serious and you could mitigate it or negotiate it. These fines are negotiable.
So definitely something that you don't want to just sit on and not take serious.
That's like poking a guy, poking an inspector in the eye. So that's just a tip that don't let them accrue penalty after penalty. The second, the final parting thing is that we know today that COVID has the front page, but please reinforce all other safety aspects on the job. Again, the top 10 violations last year, or the top 10 accidents, let's call them the top 10 accidents and incidents, were all in falls. The most reportables are in falls. So be careful about your bucket trucks, your aerial lifts, ladders. An awful lot of injuries falling off of a 6-foot ladder. Not so much from the fall, but from the pipe stub that you hit when you trip. Silica is still, respirators with silica are still in the forefront. So pay attention to everyday safety as well as COVID protocol and precaution.
Well, sounds great. Jim, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions here. And those of you that are on the webinar, you can use the Q&A feature of Zoom, or feel free to add it into the chat, but we'll hold tight here for a couple of minutes and see if there's any questions that come in, and we'll try to get those answered. Again, I think it's important to look at, who are some of your potential partners. Like Jim said, it's, in insurance companies, it sounds like is a great one, but then also looking at some of these different resources, the OSHA website, maybe some of your local municipalities, but going out there and making sure that you do have all the information that you need to make, informed decisions of what you're doing around safety. I'm not seeing any questions coming in at this point here. I guess we'll give it another minute or so, but do want to thank our sponsor for the webinar, Anchor Rock, again. As we mentioned before, you can go to their website or reach out to Chris directly. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can reach us on our website at firestonecg.com or by phone at 402-817-1420. But not seeing any questions right now. I guess we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So I want to say thank you to everybody that attended the webinar. Thank you to our sponsor, Anchor Rock. We will have the recording of this webinar available on our YouTube channel later this week, as well as a download of the slides from the webinar on our website. So if you would like to watch the webinar again or share it with somebody else in your company, feel free to send that link to them as well. So thank you, everybody, and have a safe week.